Hi, today we're going to get into our Pro Tools software. Remember that you have two versions of the Pro Tools software. You have Pro Tools Express, which came with your MBox Mini, and Pro Tools 10, which we asked you to purchase because it's the state-of-the-art software for music and sound and audio production in just about every application. So hopefully you already have the MBox Mini connected to your computer and you have the Pro Tools 10 software installed. And we're going to open Pro Tools 10 and start to look at some of its features. So we're going to open Pro Tools. There's our Avid Pro Tools window, and it loads fairly quickly depending how many plugins and other aspects and components you have inside of it. And instantly it brings up the Quick Start menu. And notice that we have the Quick Start menu show Quick Start dialog when Pro Tools starts box checked. I would always recommend that you include that so that when you open Pro Tools, your settings can be checked and you can make sure that they're the ones that you would want to use. Let's look at the options that we have in our Quick Start menu. We have Create Session from Template. A template is a pre-configured group of tracks and other parts of Pro Tools that you could use if it was meeting what you wanted to do with it. And there's quite a lot of templates included in Pro Tools 10. We have guitar templates where we could do blues guitar or metal guitar or rock guitar. We have music production where we could do blues or electronica or hip hop or funk or jazz. Lots of kinds of musical genres. We have post-production templates, a surround sound template, a stereo template, a TV mix. All kinds of templates. 11 we have. 11 is a separate interface, somewhat different than the MBox Mini. It's meant for using with guitars. We also could open a session if you had already created a session that you had worked on and wanted to go back to it. You would use open session and find where that session was stored on a hard drive. What we're going to do is create a blank session, and notice that as soon as we create a blank session, we get some session parameters or components or aspects, if you will, that we can choose exactly how we want to configure our Pro Tools session. In Pro Tools, whenever you're working in a session, much the same way that in some programs you might be working in a document. For example, in a word processing program, in Pro Tools you're always working in a session. So our first choice is audio file type, and currently Pro Tools 10 gives us two choices: BWF.WAV, or broadcast wave, or AIFF. Our recommendation for you is that you use .wav or WAV files rather than AIFF files, and the reason is that .wav files or WAV files are compatible with both Mac computers and PCs, where AIFF can only be used with Macs, so in terms of compatibility, WAV files make a little more sense. If you happen to be working or seeing an older Pro Tools session or an older version of Pro Tools, you might also see SD or SD2 files listed. Those are Sound Designer files that were proprietary for Pro Tools. They're not used anymore, but you may on occasion have to go back and use them. The next thing we would choose is our sampling rate, and this version of Pro Tools with the Mini MBox allows you to do 48 kilohertz or 44.1 kilohertz. 44.1 kilohertz is the sampling rate used on compact discs or CDs. 48 tends to be used for digital video. You should, however, be aware that some Pro Tools systems and some other audio production now uses sampling rates much higher, sometimes up to 192 kilohertz. In terms of bit depth, we have three choices in Pro Tools 10. We have 16-bit, 24-bit, and 32-bit floating. With our 48K sampling rate, I'm going to recommend that you use 24 bits, although 32 bits would give us a little bit more processing power. We also can choose our I/O settings. I/O in audio stands for input-output, and it looks at how signals come in and out of the Mini-MBox and your Pro Tools session, and it's something we'll be working with continually through the semester. Now, this default as it comes up says last used, but since we're just opening this up for the first time, we're going to go in and choose stereo mix instead. And now we're going to say OK and let Pro Tools load. And we're going to have to name our session, so we'll name it Pro Tools Demo Number 1. And we'll save it. And now it has opened up the first of our Pro Tools windows, and this is called the Edit window. Some audio production programs have window after window after window, and it gets quite complicated. One of the things that's interesting about Pro Tools is that you're always working in one of two main windows, this one which is called an Edit window, and the other window which is called a Mix window. Our first thing is we're going to create some tracks, and then we're going to acquaint ourselves with the various features in both windows. So to create tracks, you could go up to the track menu, and where it says new, here is the command that would create new tracks. It's Shift Command N, and we could do that, and it would bring up this little menu, and we could choose how many mono audio tracks we want to create. If we want a different type than mono, we could choose stereo there as well. I'm going to choose 4 mono audio tracks, and then I want to add some different types of tracks as well. And I have several choices. I could hit this plus symbol here, and it gives me a new row, and I'm going to choose 2, and I want stereo audio tracks this time. Now I'm going to hit the plus symbol again, and this time I'm going to use a shortcut, and the shortcut is going to be I'm going to hold down the Command key, and once I do that, then the right and left arrow keys are going to allow me to choose between mono and stereo. So I want a stereo track, but this time I don't want an audio track, so I'm going to use the down arrow and choose a stereo aux input. And now this time I'm going to use a shortcut. Rather than hit this plus key here, I'm going to do Command N, and it brings up another row. And this time I'm going to hold down the Command key, hit the right arrow, and come down 2 clicks here and create a master fader. Now I've created 4 mono audio tracks, 2 stereo audio tracks, a stereo auxiliary input, and a stereo master fader. Incidentally, if you wanted to, in the future, not come up here and create new tracks that way, there is a shortcut or a hotkey, and that would be Shift Command N, and that would bring up that exact same dialog box, and you could create tracks from there. One thing I like to do when I'm working with Pro Tools is name the tracks. So I'm going to do that, and all we're going to do is double click on that first track, Audio 1, and we're going to name it for now Dialogue. The next track we'll name Foley, and the next track we'll name Sound Effects, and the next track we'll name Footsteps. Next track we're going to name Music Bed Number 1. Next track we're going to name Music Bed Number 2. And the next track, which is our auxiliary track, we're going to name Reverb, because that's where we're going to put reverb or reverberation into our sessions. Now we have all our tracks named. They can be renamed, but it really helps to organize our files when our tracks are named. And if we recorded anything into any of these tracks now, the audio files would include the names of the tracks. So if we recorded something on the Foley track, it might say Foley 01 rather than Audio 01, and that would help us find it over here in our clip bin when we start recording and having sounds there. In Pro Tools, a clip is any piece of audio or automation or MIDI information, and this is where we keep track of them and organize them. We can make this bigger or smaller, and this is where you're going to take the sounds that you used with your Zoom recorders and store them and put them into your Pro Tools sessions. Let's look at some other features of Pro Tools, including how to switch to the other window, which, if you remember, if this is the edit window, which it shows us right there, the other main window is called the mix window, and we could simply come up here and choose to go to mix, and if you look over here, you'll see that Command equals will switch you to the mix window, and that's what our mix window looks like. It's essentially the same information displayed in a different format, and this window is emulating a console or an audio board or a mixer, where the other window is somewhat emulating a tape recorder or an editing surface. So I'm going to switch back to the edit window, and again, I could come up here and say I want to go to edit, or I could simply use the shortcut, which would be Command equals, and that brings me back to that window. Let's take a look around the design or setup of this window and see what we can see and begin to understand how to use Pro Tools. Here are our edit modes: shuffle, spot, slip, and grid. And what those modes have to do with is how we move pieces of sound around on our various tracks. We're going to demonstrate that in a little while. And the best advice I can give you is that what you need to do is really learn how to use these modes and have them work for you rather than fighting with them or working against them. They each have a very specific purpose, and all of them are very useful for various kinds of things. This area here is a magnification or zooming area where we could look at various things either zoomed in or zoomed out. And these are the tools in Pro Tools. We have our zoomer tool where we could zoom in on a particular audio clip. We have our trim tool, which would allow us to trim the beginning or end of an audio clip. We have our selector tool, which allows us to select part of a clip. We have our grabber tool, which allows us to grab pieces of sound and move them around. We have a scrub tool, which allows us to listen to sounds. And finally, a pencil tool, which allows us to redraw waveforms or automation data. These are presets for how you view things and other kinds of Pro Tools features that we'll get into in a later part of the course. Here are our counters, and this is our main counter. I like to always have a sub counter as well and be looking at two kinds of time management or time calibration. And if you click on main here, you will see that we can choose minutes and seconds, bars and beats, time code, feet and frames, or samples. For now, I'm going to choose minutes and seconds as my main counter, and my sub counter I'm going to put on time code. Now I have two ways to look at what's going on and where I am in my Pro Tools session. This area obviously has to do with the starting and ending and length of a particular session. And here's our grid and nudge area. The grid, we'll explain in a minute, has to do with the grid editing mode. And nudge has to do with us choosing small increments of time and being able to move our cursor or move a sound in very small increments to exactly where we would like it. Let's look over here now and look at each track and what's possible on each track. This is called our record enable. If we enable that track to record, we could then, if the whole system was set up for recording, we would be able to record on that track. S stands for solo, and what solo does is it allows us to listen to one or more tracks that are soloed without hearing the other tracks. And M stands for mute, which allows us to turn off a track that we don't want to listen to either at that moment or again, or we don't need it. Here we have a column for inserts and another column for sends and a column for I/O. And if you remember, I/O stands for input/output. There are as well other columns we could insert in Pro Tools, and we would get those out of the View part of the menu. And if we go to the Edit Window View, we could choose All. And those are all of the columns we could put into a Pro Tools session. We don't need these for what we're doing this semester, but we could look at them, and I'll show you some you might use occasionally and some that you would use very commonly. Another way to add or subtract them is this little emblem over here, and we could take away things we don't need. Like I'm going to take away real-time properties, and I'm going to take away instruments, and I'm going to take away track color, and I'm going to take away inserts F through J, and I'm going to take away sends F through J. And I'm going to take away mic preamplifiers or mic pre's. So we're back to our inserts, our sends, and our input/output, and I've added a comments view column as well. The comments view column is exactly what it says. If you click on it, it allows you to write comments. The comments could be notes to yourself to check something or do something. For example, we could say check buzz at 1 minute. Okay, that would be something that we're writing ourselves a note. Or we could put some recording or sound information in there. For example, we could say the kind of microphone we used, AKG 414. That would be another kind of information we might want to store. For right now, I'm going to get rid of the comments view because we don't need it. And we could look at the inserts view, the sends view, and the I/O view. Inserts in Pro Tools are where we're going to put what's called plugins, which are our software processors. And we're going to show you how to work with those in various ways. Sends are a way for us to create roads or paths, if you will, that will allow us to send signals from various tracks to other places. And again, I/O or input/output allows us to configure what comes to a particular track and where it goes out. When you're working with the MBox Mini, all the outputs should probably say output 1, 2, because the MBox Mini only has 2 outputs. Let's look now at the clip list, and we're not seeing it right now. So let's go over and see why we're not seeing it. It's over here now. Sometimes you'll come in and you won't see the clip list, and it's this symbol right here that will bring it back for you. Okay, let's take a look at the edit modes as our next piece of this. And I'm going to actually shrink this window a little bit so we can work with it a little bit more efficiently. And what we need to do is import some clips or audio, pieces of audio sound, so we can work with them and demonstrate the various edit modes. And so I'm going to do that now and show you how simple it is to import things into Pro Tools. We're going to go File, Import, Audio. Now, if you had already recorded some of your sound effects or natural sounds with your Zoom recorder and had your Zoom recorder connected to your computer, you would see that come up as on the menu, and you would see that menu of all those sounds, and you would be able to then import any of those sounds. I'm going to go to Local Projects, where I know I have some sounds, and I'm going to click on those 2 sounds and that sound, and put those 3 clips in my current file list. And notice that Pro Tools is quite smart. If they had been compatible with the format I have my system in, it would have just come up, instead of on blue on convert, it would have said add. This is telling me that I have to convert them to 48,000 cycles per second. So I'm going to do that and say convert, and now I'm going to say done. We're going to store them in our audio files folder. I'm going to say open, and now it's processing those audio clips into our system, and then it's going to ask me where we would like to store them. And we could either put them on a new track or our clip list. This is our clip list, and that's what I'm going to choose. And now all of the sounds that we imported are in our clip list. If we expand this, we can see them. And notice that this first one that says Deafblind Stereo has this little arrow here. And if we click on it, now we can see both the left side and the right side, or the two tracks that make up the stereo track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring one of those clips in to my Pro Tools session, and I'm going to start off doing it in shuffle mode. And again, the purpose of these edit modes is to control or guide you into how you can move these clips around. So the first one we're going to look at is shuffle, and I'm going to bring it in shuffle mode. And notice what happened. If you can see the yellow line there, it only lets me put it at the beginning of a track. Shuffle mode only allows you to put clips at the beginning of a track, or you could also put something right butted against another clip. That's a very useful thing when you're trying to actually sequence things. You could also put something at the end of a track, but that's a little bit unusual in Pro Tools currently. So again, I can only put things at the beginning of tracks using shuffle mode. What's the opposite? The opposite would be slip mode. In slip mode, I can put something wherever I want it. I can slip it and slide it and put it wherever I want it. So in many ways, it's the exact opposite of what shuffle mode is. One of the dangers of slip mode, however, is you could think that you were butted up against another clip and not quite be, or you could be overlapping another clip and not quite know it. So again, the edit modes are useful if you use them for what you intend. If you want this clip to butt up against this one, shuffle mode would be a better choice. If you want it to overlap, slip mode is just great. The next mode we're going to look at is called spot mode. And spot mode is a little bit different than both shuffle mode and slip mode. Spot mode looks at if we know a numerical value from one of our counters in time code or minutes and seconds or bars and beats where we want to place a particular sound, we could use spot mode. This often happens in film sound production, where editors will give us an edit decision list, and they have marked very precisely where they want sounds like footsteps or gunshots or car crashes or music cues. And we can simply take that information and put the sounds there very quickly using spot mode. Notice what happens when I try to drag something in spot mode. We can see the yellow outline of where it would go. However, it won't really go there. It comes up a spot dialog menu box, and it says your current time scale is minutes and seconds, but you could change it if you want. This is where you are right now. Is that where you'd like to place the sound? So let's say instead I wanted to place it at 46. If I hit the space bar, or the return, then we have placed it exactly where we want. Let me do this again for you. Brings up our spot dialog, we say OK, and it places it precisely where we told it to. So those are very, very useful things for us. I'm going to go to the stereo track now and show you grid mode. Now grid mode, I don't know if you can see it now, so I'm going to expand the grid lines. There, you should be able to see them now. you can see that we've made a grid here. And the grid is controlled right here. And we can choose what we want to have the grid reflect. Again, bars and beats, minutes, seconds, time code, feet and frames, samples, etc. And for each choice, what we want each grid line to be. So right now I've chosen time code, and I've chosen that each grid line is one frame. So if I move this, it only allows me to put them at the beginning of a frame. I can't put it anywhere else. If I choose another type of measurement, like I choose minutes and seconds, and I choose that every grid line is going to be a half of a second, then I can only move these by half seconds. Okay, it's not giving us enough room to do that, so what we will do is we will simply go back here and change our grid control, and we'll say our grids is going to be 10 milliseconds. And now if we move it, we can move it by 10 milliseconds. It's a very useful function for moving audio clips in small but specific increments. So now we've looked at the basic outline of the edit window. We've looked at how the edit modes work. We've looked at clips and how to manipulate them. We've looked at how to change from the edit screen to the mix screen. We've looked at our insert column, our sends column, and our input-output column. We've looked at record enable, solos, and mutes. And the only other thing we're going to look at in this demo on this window is this part of our edit screen. And this is our track display section. It isn't telling you how many tracks you have in your session, but what tracks you're displaying. So we could show all tracks, we could show selected tracks, we could hide tracks, etc. It's just a display tool. Groups down here allows us to take several tracks or many tracks and combine them so we can control them all together. And you'll see there's a little group menu right here as well. So that'll be the end of our first demo in Pro Tools. As far as the edit window, if we go and look at the mix window, and I'm going to use the shortcut again, which is Command equals, we can see roughly the same things in this configuration again. Here's our inserts, here's our sends, here's our I/O, here's our volume controls, here's our record enable, here's our solos and mutes. And the only thing we haven't really talked about that we're going to look at right now is our pan controls. And our pan controls allow us to place a sound left or right in our mix. For example, we might choose to put a guitar on the left and a piano on the right. And if we go back to the other window, we can see those pans are right here. In our next demo, we'll look at the tools of Pro Tools, but we've gotten through the edit modes and the basic layout, and we'll go into the tools in our next demo.